Well, good evening, IFL Nation, and welcome back to the lab. So happy that you're here with me tonight. Appreciate you taking your time out of your evening to go over some more IFL football. It is 7 p.m. over here on the East Coast, which means one thing, and that is Wager Wednesday in the Indoor Football League. Thank you so much for tuning in. Um, this is the weekly segment where we go over the week that was and the week to be in the Indoor Football League season. So, for those of you who are new to the league or my channel specifically, I want to welcome you aboard. My name is Alex Schuberth. I am a IFL contributor over for Sports Coast to Coast. That's a Pacific Northwest-based sports forum site that specializes in coverage of the Indoor Football League and its member teams specifically. We've got team-by-team rosters, breakdowns, game previews, and recaps, basically covering A through Z across the entire Indoor Football League. Definitely worth checking out if you haven't heard of it or haven't gotten the chance to take a look at it in further detail yet. The link is in the description, and there you will also find my written version of this segment on a weekly basis. We've had 15 of these things so far, and tonight will mark the 16th. So there we have it. 15 weeks, 99 games in the books as we gear up for some playoff football in its purest form. So excited to see how these final weeks of the regular season are going to shake out. But first, let's take a step back and discuss what happened last week. In total, it turned out to be a split even week, but we had some near misses along the way, including a backdoor cover that got overturned. We had two potential game-winning drives wind up as interceptions. But we also had some positive developments in there, particularly calling scripts on our over-under bets, which is an area that we had struggled on from the middle of the season up to last week. So we'll get to the game-by-game recaps in just a little bit. We'll also go over some season analysis, see if there's any recent trends by team or by bet type that we could potentially take advantage of as we try to prognosticate these final 4 weeks of the regular season. Once we do all that, we'll set sail on week 16 of the season. There are 8 games for the third week in a row. Next week, we will have teams on bye, so this is our penultimate chance with an 8-game slate to try to put up 6, 7, or maybe even that coveted 8-win slate. We've got 7 games on Saturday and a Monday night football game this time around. So pretty exciting stuff. It's a little bit different. We'll do our single game bets followed by our 3-leg parlay of the week, which somehow, some way, we've only hit one of these this year. Granted, we've put up minimum odds of plus 400 on each parlay attempt, but still, it would have been nice to see 2 or maybe even 3 of those see it through. But alas, we're stuck at 1. We're going to try to make it 2 this week. And then we'll also go over the futures forecast and trends in another week where the dynamic changed quite a bit. So we'll discuss that market at the tail end of this segment. So there are our week 15 results. As you can see, we've somehow in some way managed to get above 500 with both our spread betting and over-under betting throughout the whole year. Granted, it's only by a game, but when you go through the season that we have, you'll learn to take those positives and not think twice about them. Really, it's just the money lines that have been a problem for us. Especially with the favorites. We've been pretty unlucky there, with favorites winning about 70% of the time on the season. To fail to hit even 50% of those is just really, really unlikely. And the underdogs just haven't hit for us really at all this season, as opposed to last season when that was literally our cash cow. So maybe some fortunes will change depending on which underdogs you do wind up going with. But first, let's go over game recaps. We'll start off with the losses first because there is one particular win that I want to save for last. And if you've been following me at all throughout the week or reading my column in preparation for this, you probably know which game it is. So stick around to find out. We'll go first to the Pirates and the Sharks. So I mentioned just a moment ago how there was one game that had a touchdown at the end, challenged, reviewed, and overturned. This was the game that had it. And at that point, the Pirates were leading 44-30, needing a stop Jacksonville on their final drive in order to secure their victory. On that drive, it was a touchdown pass from Fred Payton to Breon Michelle. But Massachusetts has observed that there was a false start on Jacksonville's left guard. Officials agreed, took the points off the board. Jacksonville couldn't come up with the scoring play after that. So the game ended with that same stat line, 44-30. Pirates putting an end to a 3-game losing streak in advance of their showdown with Quad City next week. We had another loss in the Green Bay Quad City game. We had gone Green Bay with the spread, and for the second consecutive home game for Quad City, where they were double-digit underdogs, not only did they cover, they outright won. And they blasted out to a 21-3 lead early in the first half rather. But Quad City came back in that second half, make it a 27-all ball game. And then Quad City, they weren't flustered. They recovered quickly. They got a touchdown, a defensive stop, a field goal, and then a game-sealing interception at the very end. So Quad City back to 500 with a big win, 37-27. Unfortunately, that result didn't do any good for us as we needed a Green Bay to have the double-digit margin of victory rather than Quad City. The Oilers and Barnstormers. This was another rough one for us, especially considering that Iowa had a really good early lead. They were up 28-14 with about 5 minutes left in the second quarter. At that point, Tulsa absolutely took charge. 27-0 run. They ended up getting ahead by 2 scores. Iowa fought back. They had the ball late in the game inside the 1-minute warnings, down 6. And a late deep pass from Daniel Smith was intercepted by Tulsa, ending the Barnstormers' bid for another win in Des Moines. But that one, the Oilers, keeping their playoff hopes afloat, winning 54-48 on the road. Our last loss there, Arizona at Vegas. We took the Rattlers as the favorite in a game that honestly could have gone either way. The lead changed hands basically every possession in the second half. The defining play, though, was when Arizona had the ball down 5. Dalton Snead pass intercepted by James Caesar. That allowed the Nighthawks to take possession, get a touchdown. They got back ahead by double digits. The result, the Nighthawks end up winning that game by 5 by a final score of 55-50. So those were our losses. Let's look at our wins. Starting with Bay Area and Duke City. This bet exemplifies why we look at games the way that we do. We observed that these teams have been cashing unders pretty much nonstop for the past month. And this was set at a number that on the season collectively has been an overwhelming success for under bettors. So we played the numbers and we were rewarded handsomely. Neither team cracked 35 in a game that turned out to be deceptively close. Not a lot of people had this, I don't think. But the Panthers rally in the second half from a 10-point halftime deficit. They beat the Gladiators 34-32 to stay in first place in the Western Conference. Going to skip ahead to San Diego, Tucson. This is a game that probably should not have been a win, if I'm being completely honest. Tucson's offense, though, they finally woke up after basically 3 weeks of being MIA. And it was Tulsa again that got out to a hot start. They were leading San Diego at the half, but then San Diego's defense started to figure out Kenyatta Allen. We had a scoreless drought, pretty extensive scoring drought midway through the third from midway through the fourth, where no points were scored, and that really saved us. Came down to the final possession, Tucson needing a field goal to win the game and cash the over, but a pass was intercepted by San Diego's Tariq Thompson, and the Strike Force, for the second consecutive week, get a 1-point win on the road, 41-40, with the 81 points cashing us that under. And that San Antonio, Northern Arizona game, ooh, lordy, that was arena football at its absolute craziest. All gas, no brakes on the offense from both teams, who just kept trading punch after punch after punch. And again, the play of the game was provided by the defense. Sam Castronova threw an interception. It got recovered by Northern Arizona for a pick six. Absolutely swung momentum in that game. The Wranglers getting out with a win, 74-68. And that game, our spread bet was decided by a missed drop kick by Axel Perez on the final touchdown that the Wranglers scored in that game, which is insane when you consider that Perez was 7 for his previous 7 on those drop kick attempts. He single-handedly nearly set this slip ablaze for me. Absolutely insane stuff. But as crazy as that was, nothing will ever come remotely close to the level of absurdity that allowed us to win our over 91.5 bet in the Sioux Falls Frisco game. Long story short, there was 40 seconds left in the game. Frisco was at Sioux Falls 1-yard line. The Storm didn't have any timeouts. 99.9% of the time, that's a kneel down, run out the clock, win the game. Not with the Frisco Fighters. They punch it in with Justin Rankin with about 38 seconds left. That got the score between the two teams up to 89 points. And then Sioux Falls miraculously gets a 2-play drive as clock expires. They get a meaningless garbage time touchdown in about the most garbageiest time possible. That touchdown pushed the total over 91.5 in a game where the Fighters won 55-40. Just an absolutely ridiculous way to win a bet. I'm convinced that all of the luck that we didn't have through the first 14 weeks was pretty much jarred up and applied to this single game for us. That is as much of a bailout as can be. There's no way that bet should have won. But like I said before, we're going to take it, we're going to chuckle about it, and we're going to move on. And as you can see on the bottom, our parlay didn't do so great. We got the last leg of the 3 to go in pretty convincing fashion, I might add. But the name of the game in parlays is getting all 3 legs, and that's something that's been a challenge for us this year. So hopefully this week's attempt will turn up all green for us. On the season, we're still looking at about between a 7 and 8% negative on the ROI. Translates into a loss around the 7-8 unit mark. We're still climbing up. Whenever you're down like this, anytime you can even get a push for a record, you're probably going to wind up tracing closer to a push on the season. But this was the just the second time all year where we've had at least one of our methods yield positive results in consecutive weeks. So we're going to hope to keep that going and try to put together winning weeks each of the next 4. See what happens. You can see the year-to-date results by money and by ROI. Like I've been saying for the past few weeks, our baseline is to get back at or above 0 on each of these. It's going to require a ton to go right, but I genuinely believe that it can be done. Had an interesting week as far as the betting splits go for this past week. The over-under was dead even for a second consecutive week. Bay Area remains the king of the under, while Sioux Falls and Frisco remain kings of the over. Although you could easily make the case that San Antonio should have that distinction now, but I digress. That 88.5, 89.5 mark still remains kind of that defining point of whether overs or unders get disproportionately tilted. 88.5 or below, we like overs typically. 89.5 or above, unders have been the better play on average. Underdogs are still covering at a 57.6% clip. Again, they were even 4-4 in week 15. The past 8 weeks in particular have been a heater for underdogs. And those teams at both ends of the spectrum on that front remain largely the same. We've had Sioux Falls and Jacksonville there at 4-8 against the spread. Coincidentally, those two teams play each other, so one of them is bound to get a rare spread win. The Pirates and the Rattlers are each 5-8, and the Steamwheelers 5-7 against the spread. And the teams at the top of the table there, San Diego, Green Bay, Iowa, and Duke City are tied at 7-5. Tulsa's got those 7 wins, 5 losses, and a push. Interestingly, for those top 4 teams from last week, none of them covered, which is pretty interesting to me. And then from a home field advantage standpoint, when it comes to the spread, we had it a little bit in week 15, but largely on the season, it doesn't seem to be much of a determining factor. This is a good week to pick favorites on the money lines in week 15. Only Quad City's upset of Green Bay stood as the lone underdog win of the season. Everything else was all chalk. Those favorites taking care of business. And the DraftKings eligible games, about the same win rate. And home teams do have a little bit of advantage on that straight up record, even though those went even last week. For this week's table with the team results, I've also put in a column at the end there, indicating some interesting trends by team. We saw with San Diego and Tucson last week in their game that they had been cashing the unders for each of the past 3 weeks in the case of Tucson and 5 weeks in the case of San Diego. With their under cashing last week, those got up to 4 and 6 respectively. And got some other pretty interesting trends right there. I've used a lot of these with my picks for this week, so I'll be sure to make mention of them later on as we progress through here. And now for our disclaimer section, the lines and odds that we are going to be using, and they are subject to change, by the way. They're going to come from DraftKings Sportsbook. Once ESPN bet lines come out either tomorrow or Friday, I will update any games that do not have ESPN bet moneyline options, and I'll fill those gaps in with ESPN bet numbers. Though our eligible pool of available wagers is going to come specifically from DraftKings. I'm not going to use anything from ESPN bet. That's going to be purely informational. This is really for entertainment purposes only. We're not in the business of making money here. We're in the business of analyzing these games, seeing if we can find value out of them, and see if our picks hold up. This is really just a fun little thing that we like to do here. If you are of legal age and in a legal jurisdiction where IFL betting is available, you're more than welcome to tail my bets. But if you do so, please practice safe gaming habits, have a budget, spend only what you can afford to lose, and don't chase losses. If you or a loved one is having issues with problem gaming or think that that might be something of an issue down the line, there's a lot of resources, particularly online, that you can consult to get help on that matter. Haveagameplan.org is a great example of this. It's a site that helps debunk several gaming myths and offers additional resources as well. So, moral of the story, just be safe if you do decide to try your luck. And with that all being said, now is the moment that you've been waiting for. Let's make some picks. We'll start with the early window games, 7:05 on Saturday. Frisco and San Antonio. The Fighters going into Freeman Coliseum favored by 6. The over-under is the highest in the IFL this season at 109.5. Frisco is trading for minus 245 on the money line. And San Antonio gives a nice triple your money option if you believe that the Gunslingers can recover and record a big-time win. And I can't help but think that lofty number is the byproduct of two things. One, the fact that San Antonio just played in the highest scoring game in the IFL in 5 years. And then there's the other school of thought where this over is really high because Frisco's offense is deadly. And they've been an over money-making machine recently. So that over at 109.5 is a really interesting number. Historically, that seemed to favor the under when it's set that high. But my attention is actually being redirected towards a different pick here. Normally, I'd be all over San Antonio on the spread. I feel like that's been a great bet all season long, particularly when the Gunslingers are underdogs. We saw last week where even if that defense is getting killed, Sam Casanova can single-handedly keep Gunslingers in games. But in the same breath, when do we get the option to pick Frisco on the money line straight up? Remember, the Fighters have something to play for too. They got a really good outcome last week when they beat Sioux Falls and Green Bay lost to Quad City. Frisco still needs help in order to steal back that number 1 spot, but make no mistake, they don't want to drop any of their 3 remaining games on the season. And for San Antonio, this is going to be a challenge. Bear in mind, too, that when these two teams played consecutively on week 6 and 7, the Fighters only had TJ Edwards for basically 2 drives in that entire series. He had suffered that injury that cost him about 4 or 5 weeks of action. So this should be the first time that the Gunslingers truly have to deal with Edwards. And now they can pair him with Justin Rankin, Martez Carter. It's not hard to see Frisco putting up 60 again, just like they did in the last meeting here in San Antonio. Ultimately, I think the Fighters have the experience and the know-how to get this game done. San Antonio will probably keep it interesting, but I am most confident in Frisco winning this game outright. Not going to lay the points. I'm going to go straight up here. I want to start off this week with a win. And backing Frisco is the way that I hope to get there. Our first of 3 8 o'clock Eastern kickoffs, the Tucson Sugar Skulls and the Duke City Gladiators. This is the bottom 2 teams in the West, and it's the Gladiators, despite the worst of the 2 records. Favored by a point, the over-under is 80, and Tucson's minus 102 money line, and Duke City minus 118. I know I say that this game's going to be interesting a lot, but with both of these teams out of the playoff picture, this is really about 2 teams fighting for bragging rights and starting the process of building some momentum heading into the 2025 season. For Tucson, they made a couple of roster moves this week, headlined by the departure of wide receiver Jalen Marshall. That kind of causes me a little bit of resistance when picking Tucson. Even though they gave San Diego a really frightening scare last week. Duke City, they did the exact same thing to Bay Area last week. That was a 2-point loss for the Gladiators, a team that has had a lot of those close losses this year. So it really isn't. It's a weird game to pick, but I'm going to go with the home team. I'm going to take Duke City straight up. I feel like home field is going to play a role here. And I do like what I've seen out of Hassan Rogers at the quarterback position, especially with that offense continuing to build momentum. The thing for Rogers, though, is that we know that he does have the talent to string together touchdown drives. He's just got to be able to do that for a full 60 minutes while taking care of the football as well. So, in what should be at worst an intriguing battle to see who climbs out of the cellar or stays in the cellar, I'm going to take Duke City outright. Minus 118 is not too much of a price to pay here. So that's the 7 versus 8 in the West. Now let's look at the 7 versus 8 in the East. Jacksonville at Sioux Falls. The Storm at home laying 9 in the hook with the over-under set at 88.5. Jacksonville's plus 300 on the money line and Sioux Falls is minus 380. Now for this game, the quarterback's carousel continues for Jacksonville. They released Fred Payton Jr. after last week's loss against Massachusetts, and they also parted ways with Breon Michel. So they've brought a couple of other new guys in. One of them is actually a pretty familiar name from yesteryear, Caleb Barker. He was out of the league last year, but in 2022, he was the starting quarterback for the Northern Arizona Wranglers, whom he led to Henderson and tracked down an IFL championship trophy. So he goes down to Duval, maybe an audition for a starting job in 2025. Who knows? Maybe it'll be another story of Barker leading a team that won the least amount of games in the league last year, making a charge for the following postseason. Who knows? But anyways, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. The short of it is Jacksonville is going to look almost as brand new as they did last week when they had several players on both sides of the ball make their debuts. Sioux Falls, on the other hand, they've got more of the continuity. A bunch of their offensive playmakers like Bryson Denley, Kentrez Bell have been there pretty much wire to wire. Same deal with a bunch of their defensive playmakers. I can't trust either team on the spread, and I don't exactly know how to make this over-under wager. I could see it going both ways. So it's another game where I'm kind of cheaping out. I'm going to the money line, and I'm doing this sooner rather than later in the event that this thing bumps up to a 10-point spread and money line bet does not become available. So I locked this pick in earlier, and I locked this pick in now. Sioux Falls, money line. We pay the steep price, but all for the sake of pursuing some wins here. Last game of the 8:05 window is the Green Bay Blizzard taking on the Tulsa Oilers. Green Bay coming off a loss, but still favored by 9, with the over-under set at 87.5. Green Bay minus 340 money line and Tulsa plus 270. Here's the purely coincidental part of this game. The last time the Blizzard lost, their following game was the home version of this matchup with Tulsa. One that Green Bay won by 20 in a low-scoring 42-22 grind. Now they'll have the task of repeating that performance at Box Center against a Tulsa offense that has, despite the injury to Josh Crockett, still managed to put up a bunch of points in the past few weeks, averaging about 48-49 a game in that span. Going up against Green Bay is going to be as stiff of a test as Tulsa faces for the remainder of the season. The question becomes, are they up to it? And with Green Bay's offense in a little bit of flux right now, they've had a bunch of games in the 60s, but they've also had a bunch of games in the high 20s to low 30s. So they've got a little bit of consistency to work on as they gear up towards the playoffs. And I think this game means too much to Green Bay to allow them to drop this game again. They've used up all the buffer room that they had last week with Frisco winning and Quad City losing. The path still goes through Green Bay if they win out, which I believe they start that journey right here. I know I'm being a little bit boring this week so far with moneyline bets. I promise you that is going to change with the remainder of this week's slate. But priority number one is picking high percentage outcomes, backing good teams to take care of business in terms of Frisco and Green Bay, along with Sioux Falls and Duke City taking their games against opponents that I believe have a lower ceiling than the teams that I'm backing. So in any event, expect a nice comeback from Corey Roberson, Max Myler, and company to get back in the win column and stay a nose ahead of Frisco in the standings. And now we start off with the 9 o'clock window. This is the Bay Area Panthers up against the Vegas Nighthawks. This is the, one moment. There we go. This is the number 1 versus number 2 preview in the West. And it's a game where Vegas is a slight favorite, 2.5 points. The over-under is 92.5. You can get Bay Area for plus 124 on the money line and Vegas at minus 148. The last time that these two teams played, it was the Nighthawks on the road, ending an undefeated season bid from the Bay Area Panthers in a game that Vegas won convincingly. 62-43 was the final at SAP Center. And now we get to try to predict what happens in this version of the game. And this is one where I can't help but go completely contrarian against the grain with some of the trends that we've seen throughout the league this season. We mentioned how Bay Area is 3-9 to the under. But here's the thing. One of those few times that it went over was that aforementioned Vegas game. And I feel like in this one, Daquan Neal and Jerome Johnson are going to engage in a full-on shootout. Expect them to make explosive plays throughout the entire evening. And at 92.5, that's not too much of a departure from what we've seen out of these two teams so far this season. As long as one team cracks 50, I think we're good. And that's something that Vegas has done in 8 of their 12 games so far this season. And Bay Area has also put up some pretty solid 50, 60 point showings this season. So we're going to back both the offenses at their ceilings to put on a show at Lee's Family Forum. I'm going Bay Area Vegas over 92.5. San Diego, Northern Arizona. This is another battle between two playoff teams at the moment. Northern Arizona is laying a field goal. The over-under is 99.5. And the money line, same as in the Bay Area Vegas game. The visiting strike force at plus 124. Hometown Wranglers minus 148. What piques my interest the most about this game is the paths that both teams have taken leading up to this one. In 4 straight games, the Northern Arizona Wranglers have been involved in games eclipsing that century mark. For San Diego, each of their past 6 games has cashed the under. So with that point total set at 99.5, something's going to have to give here. It makes for a really interesting bet if we decide to go with the over and the under, which in this case, we are not going to. My point of view for this game revolves around San Diego being the league's best team in terms of spread record. A reality that's kind of been made possible in part by their close losses throughout the season. 5 losses by a combined 12 points. If you take the average, that is 2.4 points per loss, which is within this 3-point range that they're currently being given. The strike force defense has a crazy high ceiling, as evidenced by their league-leading 22 interceptions on the season. The key is going to be to force Joshua Jones into forcing some rookie mistakes, which he hasn't really done a whole lot of this season. But if the strike force are to win this game, or at the very least make it a competitive game as they have all season long against elite competition, I do like the chances of San Diego to pull yet another cover, which could potentially make them the first team to double-digit wins against the spread in the league. So we do lay an extra nickel here on the dollar, but I absolutely like this play. We get the added bonus insurance of if the game comes down to a field goal in a tied game, we would be immune to it. We're getting at least a push out of it if Northern Arizona happens to be on the right side of it. So I'm taking the points. I'm playing the strike force +3. The final 9:05 game Saturday, the Iowa Barnstormers and Arizona Rattlers. Arizona coming off a loss, still favored by 10 in the hook, over under 95.5. This is the only game of the week in which moneyline betting is not available. And for Iowa, I've got to give this team full props. They have played through the entire season, overcoming adversity the whole way through. I'm afraid to report that it might just be over for them. They released Daniel Smith this week after losing against Tulsa on Saturday night. And now they're going to start either of 2 rookie options against an Arizona defense that has been rounding out into form a little bit in the past month, the Vegas game notwithstanding. For me, with this bet, this comes down to Arizona being able to put up points in abundance like they have ever since Dalton Snead got healthy and firmly entrenched as the starting quarterback for this team. I'm a little bit uneasy picking Arizona on the spread, but I'm going to do it anyway. For the very simple reason being, if Arizona can get up to the 52, 54 points that they've been comfortably getting since Snead took over, all the defense has to do is kind of hunker down on the running game a little bit and force Iowa into some turnovers or empty drives, which I firmly believe that they can do, especially getting the home turf advantage. So I'm going to back the team that has been arguably the hottest in the IFL offensively in the past month plus, going up against a team with a new signal caller that could struggle. So I'm laying the points here. Arizona by 10 in the hook. Monday Night Football in the IFL between the Quad City Steamwheelers and Massachusetts Pirates. Hometown Pirates in Lowell they're giving 6.5 to the Steamwheelers. Over-under is 88.5. Quad City's plus 215 money line, and the Pirates are minus 265. And as I was looking more and more into this game and each respective team's underlying trends as far as betting goes, There was one observation I made that really floored me, and it was this. Amidst the topsy-turvy season that the Steamwheelers have had, en route to getting basically back where they started at 500, underdogs have been absolute cash cow in Quad City games, both against the spread and, notably, straight up. Underdogs 8-4 in Steamwheelers games, and Quad City has proven time and again that they can beat anybody on any given night. This is me going up against my hometown Buccos and selecting Quad City plus 215 straight up against the Bay Staters. Am I trying to use the reverse money line magic to get the Pirates a win? Possibly. Is this more of an emotional hedge than I'm kind of trying to let on? Perhaps. But I would not be making this decision if I did not genuinely believe that Quad City could win this game. They've already beaten the Pirates before, and they have recent wins against Frisco and Green Bay under their belts. So give me one good reason why they can't do it again. Not to mention, the defense, which had been a sore spot all season, has come off 2 really good games, limiting their opponents to just 27 points each time. And now they get to go up against a bottom 4 offense in terms of points per game production in the Massachusetts Pirates. The pieces are falling in place here for an upset to completely change the playoff dynamic in the East. So give me Quad City plus 215 in a stunner. And now we're going to go in, put together our 3-leg parlay of the week. And we are going to go with a first leg that is based really strictly on the numbers. And that is Frisco at San Antonio to stay under 109.5 points. I know. San Antonio just played in a game with 142 points. What the heck am I doing? The reality of the matter is that even with that 142-point outburst, San Antonio's games this season have only averaged 106 points each time. That's a full field goal below what this total is currently set at. And if you take that same metric for Frisco, they're right around 92 points per game combined for the point total. So this part of the parlay really comes down to both teams playing defense, or at the very least, forcing drives to get extended into 5, 6, 7, 8-minute scoring drives, which we have seen happen before. And all it's going to take for this to be in really good shape is a couple stops early on. Or if the game gets a little bit lower on tempo than people are thinking is going to be reality. So this is my first leg. I'm standing by it. Frisco, San Antonio, under 109.5. Next up is going to be an upset special pick. And it's going to be the Bay Area Panthers to take down the Vegas Nighthawks. And an interesting note, this is actually the first time since week 15 of last season where Bay Area has been the underdog. They are 3-2 straight up in the DraftKings era when they are made the underdog. There's lots of value here in this pick, and I genuinely believe that there's a good chance that the defending champs can exact revenge for their earlier loss to Vegas. If the defense holds up against Jerome Johnson and company, Bay Area could find themselves in really nice shape. So Bay Area outright at plus 124, that is my second leg. And my third leg is going to be a more conservative version of the Monday night bet. And that is Quad City to cover at 6.5 points. Excluding last week's game for Massachusetts, their prior 7 games beyond that were each determined by 1 score or less. And this game is going to have much more of that tight playoff feel than last week's game did. And that dynamic, like I said before, favors Quad City in this case. So as long as we don't get one of those 1-score games that ends in a 7 or 8 point margin of victory, Quad City plus 6.5 seems to be the right move that could string this all together in the end, assuming that those first 2 results hold up. And if we take all of those in our 3-leg parlay, a $10 bet would pay out $83.08 if we do get it correct. That would put us roughly even on the season in terms of our parlay tracker, if we do happen to get that right. And that would just be absolutely phenomenal if it did. So this is my 3-leg parlay of the week. Start with Frisco, San Antonio, under 109.5. Bay Area straight up against Vegas. And Quad City to cover in Lowell against the Massachusetts Pirates. Let's go to our final segment and the futures market. And as you can see, there are more teams here than there were last week, which was a shocking development to me. But all of the Eastern Conference teams that were taken off the board last week make a return this week, as all of them are still mathematically alive to potentially clinch a playoff spot. So teams like Tulsa, Sioux Falls, and Jacksonville, Iowa was there last week, are back on the board. Their odds are pretty crooked, though, especially Jacksonville at 200 to 1. But yeah, teams are starting to make their case here for trying to become a legitimate top contender here. Quad City in particular, their win at against Green Bay last week, caused a crazy change. They're 22 to 1 now. You could have gotten them last week at 80 to 1. Absolutely stupefying stuff. Interestingly, if you look at the teams there, you notice Northern Arizona there at plus 1,600. They have the 5th shortest odds amongst those Western Conference playoff teams. So they are actually projected to wind up on the outside of the playoff picture, even though they have twice as many wins as losses so far this year. They do have a gauntlet of a schedule in front of them, featuring 3 teams that are currently in that Western playoff picture. So it's going to be interesting to see if they can hold up, and if any of those teams within the bottom 6 can make a move. There's probably the most value here in Quad City, if I had to choose one right now. But it would just be like a $5 dart throw for me and nothing more. So there you have it. Green Bay and Bay Area at the top, and Vegas rounding out the podium, with Frisco not too far behind. Those are the most likely teams, according to DraftKings, to take home an IFL championship. So that is going to wrap it up this week for me. Just to let you guys know, if you've been watching games on Caffeine TV throughout the season, they have officially shut down business effective this afternoon. So YouTube is going to be the exclusive provider of games for the foreseeable future, unless something changes from some announcement by the commissioner. But figured I'd put that PSA out there for anybody that had migrated over to caffeine, or maybe that's how you got introduced to the IFL game. But from now on, it's all YouTube until the IFL Championship game, which will air on CBS Sports Network. 1 p.m. August 17th. So with all of that, I wish you all a very good night. May luck be on your side, and I'll see you at the cashier. Have a great night, everyone.